How big was this bear that attacked you?
It was, I think...
This interview is an absolute train wreck. Welcome to At Home in Wild Spaces. My name is Mike, and today we're going to be discussing this disastrous interview, which followed shortly after a recent grizzly attack, and discuss how news reports and the internet generally are sabotaging backcountry travelers. Okay, the story goes like this. Recently, 4 buddies went hunting near Island Park, Idaho. 2 of them came face to face with a 500-pound grizzly boar. 24 gunshots later, the bear was dead after chasing one hunter and mauling the second. In this interview given to East Idaho News, the survivors tell their remarkable true story. And yet, as expected, the internet and some sloppy journalism nearly ruined it. This interview bounces back and forth between valid information and total nonsense so much that you honestly need a roadmap to get any value out of it. So, for the sake of future human safety and the welfare of wildlife, today we're going to be walking a difficult but necessary line as we examine the virtues and vices of this interview and why journalists and influencers are either unable or unwilling to responsibly report on bear attacks. So if you haven't done so yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you have any questions about this or other bear attack stories, make sure to share your questions and feedback in the comments below. As thanks for their additional support of my channel, Wild Spaces members are guaranteed responses to their comments. But rest assured, I read every comment that's left on my videos and I respond as I'm able. Now, before we jump in, the original interview presents the attack in non-linear form as Riley and Braxton each share their portions of the story. So, for the sake of clarity and brevity, I've made some minor edits and placed events in chronological order. We're only going to discuss those portions that are necessary to highlight the successes and failures evident in this interview. After we've completed our discussion, I fully invite you to go watch the full interview if you desire, which I will link in the description below this video. Braxton and Riley began their day's adventure in close proximity to each other, which, as we'll see, was a very good decision.
We're getting to a spot where we're getting into an opening, and then
It's a little clearing.
a little clearing out of
Glass a little bit onto the other side of the drainage that we were in.
and so we kind of stopped for a second, and we looked around. We made sure we looked around because we're going up in this clearing. We don't want to spook anything.
Riley's 8-10 feet in front of me, and the trail kind of come like that, and Riley had made it around that bend. Right as I hit the corner of that trail, I heard the thud and then crashing, and I had enough time to turn around and look behind me. I made it this far, and the bear was right here. I could have reached out and grabbed its head. I have a concealed carry holster, and so it was going to take me a little bit longer to get to it, where Riley's was just right here on his hip. And
Thank goodness.
And the only thing that I could think was take off on a sprint so that Riley can get his gun out.
Okay, we need to pause here. If you spend time in the woods, especially if you're a hunter in brown bear country, you need to train for this moment. It's not going to magically come to you when you're facing a crisis. You need the muscle memory and the knowledge base to respond appropriately and maximize your chances of avoiding injury, which is not at all a certain thing, regardless of the deterrent you carry. I also want to be clear here. This is not a criticism of Braxton. I've stumbled upon a grizzly at approximately 30 feet, and I am here to tell you it can be an extremely intimidating experience. These are powerful predators capable of doing great harm, and this particular bear weighed over 500 pounds. If you ever startle a grizzly, suppressing that natural instinct to flee is definitely easier said than done. But it still needs to be said. Never, ever run from a bear. Black bear, brown bear, polar bear, it doesn't matter. You can't outrun them, and running is guaranteed to convince the bear that you are not a threat and may even trigger a pursuit or an attack. And that appears to be exactly what happened in this case. Braxton says that he turned around and the bear was close enough that he could have grabbed its head. Had the bear already committed to an attack at this point, Braxton never would have been able to run away. Additionally, had Braxton been alone and decided to run, chances are very high that this story would have ended disastrously. Now, admittedly more difficult when the bear is behind you, like it was in this case, ideally Braxton would have stood his ground and deployed his deterrent, while also calling for Riley. But as we'll see, in the moment, Braxton decided that was not an option.
I walked another 10 feet, and then I heard a loud thud. And then I remember I turned and looked at my buddy, and I just see him looking in the trees, and he goes, "Oh, crap, that's a bear!" When I heard bear, I dropped my bow that was in my hand, and I look up, I see my buddy, he started running. And so for me seeing him running, I'm like, okay, I need my gun this bad. So I look down, grab my gun, and then I look back up, and that bear was not even this far apart from him. So I put one shot in the side right here of the bear.
This is where hunting marksmanship and self-defense marksmanship diverge. A hunter trying to make an ethical shot is typically aiming for the animal's heart or lungs, and the shot is ideally taken when the animal is in profile. But these types of wounds rarely kill instantly, especially when we're talking about handguns. Because the bear was in the process of chasing Braxton, Riley might have been presented with a profile shot. But regardless, in a defensive situation, the bear is typically charging straight towards you. And in this orientation, its heart and lungs are not easily hit. And even if shots puncture those vital organs, the animal often has sufficient time and motivation to continue the attack. According to an article published by East Idaho News, the same outlet that conducted this interview, Riley was carrying a 10mm pistol. Braxton's pistol was chambered in .45 ACP, and both, according to Riley, were loaded with what he calls bear rounds. Between the two of them, Riley reports that they shot this bear 24 times. That is a lot of lead. If you've been watching my bear attack video series, you know that I openly recognize the relevance of a skilled shooter deploying an appropriate firearm when justified. I was literally out at the range today preparing for a forthcoming video on this topic. But I also work hard to inform you regarding the limitations of these tools. The only shot that will put an attacking bear down in short order is a direct hit to the brain or spinal vertebrae. Without direct hits to those small, rapidly moving targets, small arms fire has some profound limitations, as evidenced here.
And grizzly bears don't usually get off their target, but this one did. This one turned, looked right at me, and he's charging
Okay.
fast.
This is simply not true. Grizzlies routinely change targets during attacks, especially when participants are running. So I'm not sure where Riley's getting this from, but it's false.
And so I went and I put 3 more shots into it in the face shoulder area. And then I remember I squatted down and I went and tried moving into the trees a little bit. He grabbed my arm and he pulled me like that and started throwing me around
Yeah. And then
everywhere.
Okay, this is what you have to look forward to if a grizzly bear ever gets a hold of you. Attack survivors that I've interviewed, as well as many other, tell basically the exact same story about being thrown around like they were nothing. If you want to prevent this from ever happening to you, then master the bear attack ABCs, which I cover in this video. I'm not overstating this. This is the most important bear safety resource that I have ever made. So make sure to go check it out when we're done here. For now, let's return to Riley and Braxton and listen to how the rest of this attack unfolded.
I don't remember exactly which way I went, but I went away from Riley. And then I heard Riley shoot once after I made 3 or 4 steps. Riley shot once, and I heard the shot, and I was on the ground. And then I was trying to figure out what was going on. I stood up, and the bear had a hold of Riley, and I was, in the heat of the moment, you're fumbling around, whatever.
Okay, I want to emphasize that no one makes perfect decisions during a crisis. I've spoken to Army veteran Shane Burke, who was attacked by a grizzly last year while visiting Grand Teton National Park on his honeymoon. We've discussed this concept in depth. Even those with special forces and emergency training don't perform flawlessly during a crisis, particularly during a sudden crisis. During an attack, things happen fast and you just do the best you can. That is what Shane did, and that is what Riley and Braxton did, and in both cases, it worked. We do, however, want to make sure that if we ever find ourselves in this type of situation, that we enter that engagement with a clear understanding of bear behavior, a knowledge of how to engage the bear, and a knowledge of how and when to deploy our defensive tools.
He's yelling and screaming because they're fighting. I put, 4 or 5 shots into it, and then my gun jammed.
So, despite what most YouTubers and bloggers are going to tell you, firearm malfunctions are actually a pretty common occurrence during a defensive engagement with bears, especially when hotter bear defense rounds are being used. Compared to other defensive options, firearms are vastly more complex and require a much higher skill threshold, owing to the fact that their deployment needs to be very precise to rapidly end a hostile encounter. Here, Braxton and Riley benefited from being together. Had Braxton been alone, given his decision to run, it's almost certain that he would not have been able to retrieve his sidearm. And had he managed to retrieve it, he likely would have had to contend with a jammed gun and a pissed off bear simultaneously. Riley, on the other hand, was the first to shoot the bear, and according to his estimation, landed approximately 4 shots with his 10mm pistol. And yet he was still significantly injured by the bear, which reflects a really well-established and well-studied pattern seen consistently in both the attacks last year and in decades of reputable research. Now, before anyone accuses me of being anti-gun, and I'm sure it's already too late, discussing the legitimate limitations of legitimate tools is not a knock against firearms. It is a necessary prerequisite to deploying a firearm responsibly and effectively during a defensive encounter. The number one thing that Riley and Braxton did right is that they were together. It's because they were together that the bear had to engage both of them simultaneously, which afforded them additional opportunities to respond to a threat, deploy their deterrence, and solve secondary issues like a firearm malfunction. So good for Braxton for being able to clear his jam and then re-engage, instead of running away, which other people have done in the past. I'm currently working on a video discussing how to prevent firearm malfunctions in the backcountry, so make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications to get notified when that goes live. But for now, let's get back to Riley and Braxton.
So I dropped my magazine out, cracked it back to clear the jam, threw it, grabbed my other magazine, threw it in. Watching Riley as all this is going down, this bear's just flipping him from side to side. So I was having to pick my shots careful, but I got the new magazine in, and I looked down and racked it back to throw a new round in. By then, the bear's on top of Riley. Riley's shoulders are between his front feet, and his legs are kind of kicked out from its stomach. I couldn't see anything Riley was doing. I just could see the bear on him. And so I ran over, and I'm right on top of the bear, and it kind of looked up at me, and I saw its eyes, and I just started going. And then it put its head back down, and I shot some more and did the trick.
Braxton hit it. I could feel the bullets hitting the bear through my arm. Wasn't hitting my arm, but I could just feel the repercussion from the bullets hitting the bear.
From the moment that Braxton and Riley encountered this grizzly bear, up until the time that Riley received medical care for his injuries, this was the moment of greatest risk. There are numerous cases just like this one, where hunting partners encounter a bear, one of them is attacked, and their companion tries to intervene with a firearm, only to shoot and sometimes kill their companion. I am beyond relieved that that was not the case for Riley and Braxton. Clearly, Braxton has spent some time with his firearm, though how much I can't say. Nor was I there to witness the attack, but from their descriptions, the bear was moving rapidly and its jaws were locked on Riley's arm. With every shot fired, there was an extraordinary risk that one of those shots was going to hit Riley. Braxton says that he was roughly 12 feet away, but even at that distance, firing on a rapidly moving target, especially one that's latched onto your companion, while absolutely necessary in this case, was also extremely hazardous. Some people are going to get angry with me for saying this, but bear spray is pretty much the ideal tool for these types of interventions, and has been used successfully in many nearly identical encounters, including one in Glacier National Park this last summer. Bear spray is highly effective, and in this case would not have posed a mortal threat to Riley. It does, however, have some drawbacks, which we'll discuss in just a minute.
I was freaking out, and I didn't know if the bear was coming after me again. All I remember is I see my gun on the ground, I hurried and grabbed it, and I gave it 3 more shots. And then it was laying there, and then I was panicking, and I didn't know I was injured yet. I had no idea. He's like, Riley, you need to calm down. Are you okay?
So there's absolutely nothing wrong with being freaked out after being attacked by a bear. However, when injured, it is also important that you do what you can to lower your heart rate and then objectively assess your wounds.
It's like, okay, you got to pull your jacket off so I can see what happened, so I can address the situation. And then he pulled his jacket off, and there was more blood up here. And I said, Riley, you got to pull your shirt off too. And so he pulled his shirt off, and I looked at his arm, and I was like, oh, this is bad. This is not good. And I don't know if it was from being a Boy Scout or what, but I took Riley's shirt, I wrapped it around his arm and pulled my belt off and wrapped it around kind of tight to keep pressure on it.
So Riley and Braxton did a good job of improvising. They knew that they needed to put pressure on Riley's wounds, and from the images that they've shared, fortunately, his injuries were very minor. The next thing that they did was contact emergency responders, which is exactly what they should have done. But before we move on, I need to say this as clearly as possible. If you go hiking or especially hunting without a trauma kit, then you've made a serious mistake. This is especially true if you're carrying a firearm. I've highlighted cases in the past, and I'll highlight more in the future, where hunters are out in the woods and they experience a negligent or an accidental discharge, and somebody gets injured or killed, often by bleeding out from a serious gunshot wound. And quite honestly, the same can be said of a lot of other accidents and incidents that happen out in the wild, including bear attacks. There are many otherwise survivable bear attacks that turn deadly because the victim or their party weren't able to stop serious bleeding. Riley was really fortunate. The bear didn't hit any major arteries, and their improvised bandages proved to be enough. But seriously, if you go out into the mountains or into the woods or the backcountry, whether you're in bear country or not, take at minimum 2 tourniquets, multiple bandages, and a clotting agent, and know how and when to use each of them.
A lot of people have asked me, why didn't you use bear spray? And I'm like, bear spray's good if the bear's 60 yards or if you can see it and you have distance.
Yeah.
We didn't see it and we didn't have distance. So the first thought we thought was lethal.
This is the really difficult part about reacting to these interviews. There is so much positive in Riley and Braxton's experience. They were together. They came to each other's aid. They both had deterrents and were able to deploy them. But this is where the interview goes careening over a cliff and never recovers. Bear spray excels at up-close encounters, and if the bear is farther off, even better, because you have more time to react. Bear spray is quick, it's easy to deploy, and extremely effective. It projects a broad cone of sustained repellent, making it extremely easy to hit the bear's eyes, nose, and mouth, essentially attacking the bear's targeting senses and airway. And it's extremely effective at interrupting and ending aggression. So it's really unfortunate that this interview has to be sullied with some long debunked falsehoods about bear spray.
Yeah.
We need lethal now. Because even with us still having lethal, it still took us 24 shots to kill the bear.
Yeah,
So those 24 shots don't demonstrate the strength of Riley and Braxton's deterrence. They demonstrate their limitations. Like I've said, small arms fire without deep penetrating hits to the brain and spinal vertebrae often come up short during a bear attack. Now, don't get me wrong, Riley and Braxton were able to stop this bear and prevent further injury, which is clearly worth celebrating. But we need to keep the exaggeration on a leash. A handgun chambered in .45 ACP is a particularly poor choice, and I know the internet's going to get angry at me for that. As far as ballistics are concerned, .45 ACP lacks the penetrating and impact power of a 10mm, which I consider the minimum caliber for grizzly bear defense. But, I mean, it's definitely better than nothing. And even if you step it up to something like a .44 Magnum, small arms fire in general lacks the power to swiftly put down a bear. And high-powered rifles don't generally lend themselves to quick deployment. In addition to that, bears don't even know when they've been fatally wounded. They're just simply responding to what they rightly perceive to be a threat. This grizzly behaved exactly as we would expect a grizzly to behave when shot. There's really nothing surprising about the bear's dedication to this attack, or the fact that it took 24 shots to put it down. If you watch my last video, the medical examiner who actually performed Timothy Treadwell's autopsy has also performed multiple autopsies on hunters who mortally wounded a bear before being fatally mauled themselves. Injury rates run at about 50% among people who rely on firearms during a bear attack, though last year the injury rate appears to be much higher. But it's also true that guns do work to deter or end aggression most of the time. So Riley and Braxton are just victims of misinformation here, which unfortunately they are now spreading further.
Bear spray is good on a
If you
certain
can see it
circumstance.
You got time.
In my opinion, people probably wouldn't agree with me with this, but I'd rather them carry an extra magazine for their gun than bear spray.
As much as I don't want to have to say it, I have to. Riley and Braxton's statements here are false, dangerously false, and stem from an extremely popular but profoundly misguided and misinformed conversation happening online and elsewhere, which treats bear spray and firearms as rival defensive options. It is total nonsense. Listen, if you are a gun user, carrying a second magazine is not a bad thing, but there is absolutely no intelligent reason to not carry and be proficient with bear spray. I know there are some countries outside of North America that don't allow people to carry bear spray, but that doesn't change the fact that it is still an incredible tool. Bear spray and firearms are not competing defensive alternatives. If you have any questions on the supposed rivalry between guns and bear spray, then please watch my data-based video on this topic. For now, let's get back to Riley and Braxton.
I just have been doing research on bears and the way they act and trying to wrap my head around the whole situation, why the stuff happened and how it happened. And I was reading a study, I don't remember who it was from, but it was saying that once a bear is in that mode of protecting itself, then bear spray is not going to take it out of it. And so I even if we would have had bear spray, I don't think that it would have done anything.
Don't get me wrong, bear spray still has its limitations, and like gunshots, bear spray deployments are not all equal. But it remains an extremely effective tool. There are abundant examples of bear spray halting even grizzlies mid-attack, and serious study of the topic clearly refutes what Riley and Braxton are saying here. Braxton says that he's been reading studies making claims to the contrary. I'm very interested in what studies he's referring to, because I've not found any peer-reviewed research which would at all support his statements. Now, I have found countless disastrous news reports and an overabundance of influencers fraudulently claiming that their posts are quote-unquote studies. If you can find me a peer-reviewed study that states, as Braxton is claiming, that bear spray can't deter a bear when it's in attack mode, then I'd love to know about it. I have towers of evidence to the contrary, but I would welcome any credible resources that can back up Riley and Braxton's claims. Braxton, if you're watching, please share. And to everybody else, I will send a Follow the Fundamentals t-shirt to the first person that can find me that study. And in a month's time, if nobody's found the elusive study that Braxton's referring to, I'll give away a free t-shirt to somebody who's left a comment in this video. So if you know what study Braxton's referencing or still have a question or feedback, then make sure to leave a comment below. It could win you a free Wild Spaces t-shirt. For now, let's get back to Riley and Braxton.
Well, and the hard part with bear spray too that you have to worry about is if it's going to take you out too.
Yeah, because I mean it's just like a real potent pepper spray, and so you're going to incapacitate yourself and whoever else is within your 20-foot radius. You're going to incapacitate both of you or all of you.
And all that would have done was made that bear angrier.
Yeah, and would have made it worse for us because we wouldn't have been able to breathe.
Okay, so blowback with bear spray is a very real consideration. It does happen about 14% of the time. I've had bear spray in my eyes, and yeah, it sucks. But if we're talking about debilitating cases of blowback, like Riley and Braxton are describing, that's a very rare occurrence. And even then, a well-timed, effective shot is almost guaranteed to deter the bear. It's a matter of understanding your defensive tools. They're not magic wands. Like hordes of people on the internet, Riley and Braxton are unfortunately overinflating bear spray's limitations and drawbacks while overrepresenting the efficacy of firearms. If you are a responsible gun owner who is also highly skilled at defensively shooting rapidly moving targets, then by all means, carry an appropriate firearm where legal. But don't handicap yourself by buying into the internet's BS arguments against bear spray. It's weapons grade nonsense, and it's getting people hurt and bears killed unnecessarily. Okay, I've made my point, and I'm sure I've ruffled more than a few feathers, so let's move on.
How big was this bear that attacked you?
It was,
I think we were told.
it was almost 600 pounds.
This is the point where the journalist becomes complicit in spreading misinformation. It's the same journalistic behavior that created a celebrity out of Timothy Treadwell, and the same negligence that results in a steady stream of bear attack stories every year, as bear attacks and bear encounters are mishandled by journalists and commentators who repeatedly fail to consult actual experts on bear safety. Instead of doing the responsible thing and contesting Riley and Braxton's false claims, or adding commentary from a qualified expert, the reporter glazes over dangerous misinformation and changes the subject to the size of the bear, which clearly squares really well with the man versus beast mythology at the heart of most bear attack commentaries.
It was almost 600 pounds.
I think we were told 520 through 530, somewhere
I
around
was a
there.
little bit off. No, they said they called this bear the king of the hill.
Yep. It was a fighting bear.
It was a fighting bear. It was 20 years old.
Yeah, reason
And
why it
most
didn't,
grizzlies don't live to 20 years old.
in the wild. And the reason why it didn't hear us coming down the hill was because it was a fighting bear. Another bear or some animal had torn one of its ears off. And that was the ear that was facing up the hill. And so it didn't hear us coming down until we were on the side that had the good ear.
Okay, there is a lot of speculation in there. Injuries to ears are pretty common among male bears. The assertion that this was a, quote, fighting bear is certainly possible, but male bears fight. They're also individuals, and some are more or less aggressive than others. So it's certainly possible that, on average, this bear was more aggressive than other bears. But then again, it's largely speculation. But, I mean, the claim that it was a, quote, fighting bear, or the, quote, king of the mountain, definitely adds some narrational spice to Riley and Braxton's story.
We spooked it, and we weren't trying to.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even know it was there. We couldn't see it. It was in this little...
They call it
Daybed.
a daybed. And
And
so they'll
they-
dig a hole, and they'll pull brushes and scrubs and whatever to hide them.
Yeah, kind of stack it up around it or whatever.
So that's when I said we stopped and we looked around. We really didn't see anything. We just this is normal ground.
I mean, it's 7:20 in the morning. We were going into, I mean, they're kind of thick, not super thick trees, but I mean, you're in the trees in the morning. It's darker in the trees than it is outside of them. So.
Okay, so there was some really good stuff in there. Riley and Braxton startled the bear, and it responded to what it perceived to be a threat. This is classic grizzly bear behavior. It's also worth noting that hunters are one of the groups most likely to be attacked by bears. Hunters are often moving silently, or at least attempting to move silently through the landscape, so they don't spook their quarry. They often mask their scent and are frequently moving through heavy cover. All these behaviors make them among the most likely to trigger a defensive attack by a grizzly. So Riley and Braxton then go on to describe how they called 911 and requested medical assistance. Fortunately, Riley's injuries were clearly non-life-threatening, and they were able to evacuate and get Riley the medical attention that he needed. I am going to jump in here with a quick word on cell phones. Cell phones can be a remarkable emergency tool, but cellular coverage, especially in the backcountry, is not particularly reliable. When I was 19, I was involved in a disastrous backpacking trip, and like Riley and Braxton, we were able to get a phone call out on a cell phone, but only after climbing a nearby mountain summit. And decades later, cellular signal can still be pretty spotty. So I would encourage anyone who wishes to explore the backcountry to take a GPS signaling device. Some cell phones have that function, but most don't. And you don't want to be dependent upon cellular service to get emergency help.
I was boogieing. I was like, I want out of here.
Yeah, but I got the keys to the Razor. And I took off on a dead sprint up a steep hill.
It was one of the hardest climbs of my life.
Yeah.
It was a painful one too.
Yeah. He's so stubborn. He's like, I don't want any help. I don't want you guys to help me. So he hiked himself out. Other than to hold his arm up, because I was helping him not hurt as bad. But
I just knew my fear of laying down and watching how much I was bleeding. I said the only way I think I'm gonna live is if I walk myself out of here. 911 was like, you need to stay put, you need to stay still.
If you're ever involved in an emergency incident, you're going to be presented with some difficult decisions. On occasion, you may need to move locations to get away from a threat or contact help, even while injured. You can see my discussions with Todd Orr and Shane and Chloe Burke. But if the threat has been neutralized, like the bear that attacked Riley, and you've been able to contact emergency help, the smart move is to stay put, ideally with a companion. See my video on Tyler Johnson's experience. Riley is fortunate. His injuries are relatively minor and non-life-threatening, and they afforded him the luxury of climbing out under his own power. But by being, quote, stubborn, as Braxton describes him, Riley was raising his heart rate, risking increased blood loss. He also risked losing consciousness due to shock, potentially collapsing on steep terrain, adding to his injuries and making it more difficult for emergency responders to find him. Had his injuries hit a major artery or the bleeding been more severe, he would have been placing his life at risk. When spending time in wild spaces, particularly around brown bears, ensure that you have a full preventative and reactionary toolkit, beginning with your knowledge base regarding how to best respond to a threat, treat injuries, and contact help.
One of my new rules is when you go hunting, have somebody within 10 feet from you.
Yep.
If Braxton was 20 feet farther than I was, this would have been a completely different story. People told me, like, you wouldn't be here today. I can't imagine what 30 more seconds would have been. Because I have this rule about this, I had 30 seconds. And so imagine if it was a minute. That's what scares me.
Okay. This is really sound advice. Whether you're traveling in brown bear country or not, traveling with responsible companions is one of the best ways to be prepared for an emergency. I would even say that is the moral of Riley and Braxton's story. Alone, neither of them would have successfully stopped this bear. Traveling in close proximity to responsible, reliable companions is the absolute best deterrent in bear country. There are no better tools, only accessories. Not only does traveling with at least one other person allow you far greater flexibility when addressing a threat or responding to a crisis, but traveling with responsible companions is also the best way to avoid injury or a crisis in the first place. Groups of 3 or more people who stand their ground are practically guaranteed to avoid injury should they stumble upon a testy bear. It's one of the top tips that I discuss in my Bear Attacks ABC video. So yes, Riley's advice about traveling in close proximity to responsible companions is excellent advice.
I didn't hit any arteries. I have all movement in my arm still. It hurts to move it for sure because of the swollen and everything, but I have all of my 5 fingers move, my wrist moves, my elbow moves. And so I'm one lucky guy.
So luck, for lack of a better term, always plays a dominant role in every bear attack. From the factors that just have to align to cross paths with a bear, to environmental conditions, the nature of injuries, from first contact, grizzlies are more than able to inflict fatal wounds, and prolonged encounters increase the likelihood of serious or fatal injuries. There are numerous examples of people who are separated from death by just 1 or 2 millimeters. Think Rudy Norlander or Kendall Cummings. Now contrast those stories with Charles Mock, who survived his attack with injuries very similar to Kendall Cummings, even reaching the hospital only for a blood clot resulting from the attack to cause a fatal stroke. Then there's the story of Mark Upton and his hunting client, who were together, had both bear spray and a firearm, but did not successfully deploy either until after Mark was mortally wounded. Had Riley and Braxton not been able to deploy their deterrents and work as a tag team, their story could have easily turned out the same way. The point is, prevention is always the best plan, but when that fails, some preparation, seasoned with a little luck, is always a good thing. Riley was incredibly lucky that he was one of the 25% that emerged from a bear attack with minor injuries. And he and Braxton are both lucky that none of Braxton's shots accidentally struck Riley by accident.
Do you plan to go hunting again?
Well, I can't really pull my bow back anymore, so I'm kind of done for the year on that. But if I do, it's not going to be that area again. There's a lot more up there. That day after I got attacked, we have a trail cam up there. And that night, we caught another grizzly on our trail cam. And now I'm like, I'm done.
Yeah.
That area is bad.
There is a new reality out west. Grizzly bears are reclaiming lost range and moving into areas where people have become accustomed to their absence. And the situation is made increasingly problematic thanks to junk news reporting and the internet's insurmountable inventory of BS. Even people who genuinely want to learn how to safely share space with grizzly bears often can't find reliable resources and have to settle for popular misinformation like Riley and Braxton. And as both human and bear populations continue to increase, there will continue to be conflicts each year. We are going to have some big decisions to make in the coming years regarding how grizzlies should be managed, but we can't make good decisions without accurate information. That is the purpose of this video series. The presence of grizzly bears in the landscape isn't a bad thing, unless we are unprepared or poorly informed on how we can safely and responsibly share space with them. Like all bear attacks, Riley and Braxton's story is incredibly informative, though its handling has been extremely reckless. They made some good, life-saving decisions. They also got lucky and appear to be greatly confused about a number of aspects of bear behavior and bear safety. And in that sense, they pretty accurately mirror most people, especially in the internet age, with journalists, YouTubers, podcasters, and more making a killing by spreading dangerous misinformation. When journalists and internet personalities share a story, but completely neglect to accurately reflect the facts, they're doing less than half their job and endangering people and wildlife alike. I admit, it can be a very difficult line to walk, but it's the line that distinguishes responsible journalism and informed content creators from the internet's suffocating misinformation. Now, I don't have anything against East Idaho News or the journalist who conducted this interview. Most bear attack stories are mishandled. But we have a precious opportunity here to learn and do better next time. So it's really interesting. For most of this interview, Riley and Braxton are sharing a lot of misleading information about bear spray. But right at the end, Braxton almost pulls it out and shares some really good advice.
I mean, I'm going to carry both bear spray and my gun. It's better to cover all your bases and have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Well said, Braxton. Well said. There's lots of good stuff in here. Braxton talks about his upcoming marriage. They share how their families reacted to the news and how Braxton's brother figures into the whole story. By all means, watch the full interview. Just make sure that you can distinguish between the good advice and the bad advice that they offer. It could very well be your life on the line next time, so make sure that you have access to the best information available. I wish Riley and Braxton all the best, and I hope that we'll all take a moment to learn from their experience. If you have a passion for reliable content and want to stick it to the internet's BS factory, then please consider joining At Home in Wild Spaces, which you can do by clicking this button here, or by supporting At Home in Wild Spaces on Patreon. Wild Spaces crew members enjoy early access, guaranteed responses to their comments, discounts on Wild Spaces attire, and much more. Until next time, this is Mike, reminding you to follow the fundamentals, not the crowd, which coincidentally will be the subject of my next video discussing the stranger-than-fiction connection between Timothy Treadwell and Bigfoot. You don't want to miss this, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, and I'll catch you on the next one.